Today's show is brought to you by the Pittsburgh Opera. The Pittsburgh Opera is presenting an adulterous double feature not seen here since 1996. It's got jealousy, two-timing, and revenge all united in the back-to-back tragedies of Cavalleria Rusticana and Pagliacci. Possessiveness, machismo, and rage fuel their bloody conclusions, and you can enjoy these two amazing operas on the same night, November 9th through the 17th. That's with the Pittsburgh Opera, who asks, where can we take you? Learn more at pittsburghopera.org/citycast. Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, I'm tired. Are y'all tired? It's the day before the election, which means we are just hours away from the end of the texts and the phone calls and the ads. But it also means if you have not voted yet, you are almost out of time to study up on the candidates running for office. Today, we are going through the ballot that you're going to see in the voting booth in Allegheny County, not to talk about who to vote for, but what the candidates themselves say are their priorities, plus a little preview of what happens tomorrow when the polls open and when they close. It's Monday, November 4th. I'm Megan Harris, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about. I'm with producers Sophia Lowe and Mallory Falk, plus a little guest star you might hear in the background today.
Yeah, if you hear any little baby coos, my special guest is in studio with me right now.
We're very excited to have her, a future voter for sure. We've been talking about the election for weeks now, and it is coming up tomorrow. But if you are a procrastinator, maybe you haven't done your research on the candidates in your area yet, we are here to give you the rundown on some of the major races.
Literally just what you're going to see on your ballot and where to find more information if you're not sure which candidate you like best.
So we've already talked on the show about ways to vote early and mail in your ballot. But if you haven't voted yet, you are not alone. Most voters in Pennsylvania still by far choose to do it in person on election day. The lure of the I voted sticker is strong here. And all three of us are actually planning to go to the polls tomorrow in person too.
Woo! I have my fingers crossed. The wait is not that long. If you're voting in person tomorrow and do not have a car, just like me, there are actually a bunch of deals, freebies for transportation. So first, starting local, so Pogo, that bike share, they are doing Roll to the Polls, which means you can get unlimited free 30-minute rides from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. No codes required. Go vote. Go take another ride, get yourself some snacks, do whatever. And then Lyft and Uber are also doing some deals, and this is nationwide. So tell your friends, tell your family. Lyft has 50% off their rides. There's a $10 limit on the discount. You need to just use the code VOTE, all caps, and then 24, no spaces. This also works on like their bikes, their scooters, if you want to bike instead of take a car. And then Uber is also doing the same kind of thing, 50% off, up to $10. When you open the app, just look for a little go vote button and then hit that.
And a reminder, if you got a mail-in ballot, it is too late to put it in the mail because those have to be received by your county by election day, not postmarked, but received. So if you still want to go vote, you can do it in person, or you can go drop off your mail-in ballot at one of the county's ballot return sites. Those are manned. They're not just a drop box. There are people there, and there's a bunch of them. So we'll link in the show notes where you can go. The hours vary, but they are open today.
Okay, so let's get into the races themselves. We are not going over every single candidate you might see on the ballot because there are a bunch in Allegheny and the surrounding counties. So if there's something on the ballot we didn't cover on a previous show or don't talk about today, other outlets like WESA, Public Source, and Spotlight PA, they also have great voter guides that we highly recommend.
Yeah, Public Source in particular is one that I've been directing friends to in our outlying counties. They've just been doing a great job. So if you're trying to help someone in southwestern PA, but not Allegheny, definitely hit them up.
And reminder, you can check who's on your ballot in advance, so through the State Department's website and usually your county one as well. I did it for Allegheny. Do not show up to the polls and be surprised.
So let's get into it. What's on our Election Day ballots, at least here in Allegheny County? Obviously, the big one. The first one you'll see is president. If you are still undecided on that one, I don't know what to tell you, man.
I saw that WESA and a market research firm did a poll about the presidential election. So they reached out to voters in the Pittsburgh region, and 45 out of 400 voters said they were undecided. That is definitely more than I would have guessed. But yeah, we're not here to tell you about Harris and Trump. Google them if you have questions, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like if you're undecided at this point, it's because you just weren't that engaged. And maybe you're also never on social media. Good for you. Next up, still federal, we've got one of two seats up for grabs in the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, so this is a pretty critical race because it could actually determine who controls the Senate and therefore all of Congress. So it's between Bob Casey, the Democratic incumbent, and Dave McCormick, his Republican challenger. As you can tell, my child is already tired of hearing about this and we haven't even started yet.
I know. Well, even if you haven't been paying super close attention, I am betting you at least know the name or have heard the name Bob Casey. He has been our senator for 18 years. He was first elected in 2006. His dad was a politician too. So Nepo baby, Bob Casey Sr. was Pennsylvania's governor back in the late 80s and early 90s.
There's a lot of Nepo babies in Pennsylvania politics.
Yeah, I've always wondered whether Pennsylvania actually has the most political Nepo babies. It seems like we've got a ton, but I haven't done enough research to say that with full confidence and accuracy on the pod.
You've got a lot of other states to look at.
That's very true.
Yeah, right.
But okay, so, Casey has generally been considered a centrist, but some of his positions actually have evolved over time. His challenger, Dave McCormick, used to run the largest hedge fund in the world. It's called Bridgewater Associates. Before that, he worked in the Bush administration, and he was also CEO of a software company right here in Pittsburgh.
And this is actually McCormick's second bid for the Senate. He ran in the Republican primary last time, but lost to Dr. Oz, who, as we know, then lost to John Fetterman in the general.
So we're going to run through their opinions on a few key issues: the economy, border security, and abortion. Let's start with the economy. Shout out to our friends at CityCast Philly.
Yes.
They talked to Charles McElwee, who's the editor of Real Clear Pennsylvania, and he writes for Politico. This is how he described the dynamic.
Casey's trying to position himself as a hawk on China. And going back to 2012, he has had statements where he is tough on China comparative to even elected officials at that time. Casey is hitting him hard because this is a state that was eviscerated by declining manufacturing really since 1999-2000 with the opening to China. And then before that, of course, NAFTA, which was passed in 1993. So we're looking between 1993 and now, tens of thousands, countless jobs lost in Pennsylvania, including in northeastern Pennsylvania, Casey's former electoral base, where people are disillusioned over the legacy of China. That, more than anything in this race, that seems to be Casey's go-to when it comes to cornering just enough working class voters, his former base, to somehow survive this race.
And just to give you a sense of what this sounds like, here's Casey at a debate last month.
As a hedge fund manager, he was managing money for President Xi of China, investing in China, increasing those investments by 108,000%, lifting up our adversaries instead of supporting America.
Well, let's turn to your opponent.
And just a quick fact check here. While McCormick was CEO, his hedge fund did invest hundreds of millions of dollars in at least 20 Chinese companies that the U.S. eventually sanctioned for their support of the Chinese military. And Bridgewater reportedly abided by those sanctions. But McCormick actually says because of his time at Bridgewater, he knows how to work with foreign governments, and that'll be an asset if he's elected to office. And he's also gone on the defensive here. He says Bridgewater's investments in China only made up a really small percentage of their assets, just 2%.
But he's also generally kind of downplayed his time as a hedge fund CEO in the campaign trail. I think he's like, the ads in the bar rooms and that kind of thing, like trying to seem like a regular guy. I've noticed that if he does bring it up, he kind of changes the words a little bit. Like he ran an investment firm or a financial firm. For what it's worth, if you are not familiar with a hedge fund, they're like any fund group. Like a manager makes a bunch of investments on behalf of other people, the investors, and they can invest in anything they want, but in some foreign markets that could mean giving money to organizations with dubious reputations or that don't operate under the same laws that we do in the U.S., like worker protections, for example. Like from a purely business perspective, I respect ambition, but as a hedge fund manager, you get to choose what you invest in. And, now that you've decided to run for political office, all of that can now also be scrutinized.
Right.
So let's move on to the next issue, abortion. Casey's evolved on this over time because when he first became senator, he voted to restrict abortion access, but now he supports it. So after Roe fell, he voted to keep abortion legal on a federal level. And I know for some of his biggest supporters, they really point to this as a sign that Casey is able to change with the times. He's able to reconsider his positions. And, his supporters are saying these are all qualities you want to see in a leader.
Yeah. Meanwhile, McCormick said the decision to overturn Roe made him, quote, very, very happy. The last time he ran for Senate, he said during a debate that he supports exceptions for the life of the mother in, quote, rare instances, but doesn't say what those are. During this campaign, he said he supports those exceptions for assault or incest. And he says he wouldn't support a national abortion ban, but he says he thinks it should be left to the states, which is a little different than what Casey's been saying in his attack ads that McCormick wants to outlaw abortion. One could lead to the other, but they are not exactly the same thing.
Right. McCormick has also made misleading claims about Casey's stance on abortion. So on his website, McCormick says Casey has the, quote, extreme position of supporting abortion until the moment of birth, end quote. That's not true, and that's also not legal in Pennsylvania. PolitiFact points to a study that found nationally just 1% of all abortions in the U.S. happen at or after 21 weeks.
Yeah, I think in general, whenever you hear a candidate talking about people supporting abortion up until the moment a child is born, like this fact is really important to keep in mind. Last up, border security and how it has or hasn't contributed to the opioid crisis, because a lot of politicians kind of present these issues as one and the same. McCormick says he wants to use U.S. military drones and special ops teams in Mexico to destroy trafficking cartels and is presenting himself as tougher on the border than Casey. Here he is at a debate last month.
Senator Casey is rich with his strength on the border when he's time and again voted against the measures that are necessary to get our border secure. He said very clearly when President Trump was president, we don't need a wall for border security. The fentanyl crisis, I sat with 4 fentanyl families very recently in my home in Pittsburgh. It's a tragic crisis. It's gotten out of control under Senator Casey. And this is something that we need leadership to go across the border and take on those cartels. Senator Casey showed none of that leadership. He showed up now very recently as a strong advocate for the border. He hasn't even been there.
Woo! Obviously, lots of Republicans and Trump himself are using these same talking points about Democrats being weak on the border.
Heard that a lot during this campaign.
Yeah. But for what it's worth, Casey voted for the border package that Republicans rejected. It would have put billions of dollars into immigration enforcement. It would have added more agents at the border. It would have directed more resources towards stopping fentanyl from getting into the U.S. McCormick is not currently a senator. It is not on him that bill didn't pass, although he did say that he opposed it. But to allege that Casey voted time and again against border security just is not true. Plus, Casey has also met with families who've been affected by the opioid crisis. He's worked with attorneys general, including Josh Shapiro, back when he was the AG, to craft the landmark opioid settlement that's paying out to counties all over the Commonwealth now. So I don't think it's fair to say that Casey hasn't been trying to address the opioid crisis too.
Also, just as someone who used to live on the border and report on the border, I think it's always really important to clarify that in most cases, fentanyl is not getting into our country because migrants are illegally crossing the border with it. It is usually smuggled through ports of entry by people who are legally authorized to cross the border. And more than half of the time, it's smuggled in by U.S. citizens. We also hear this talking point a lot about open borders and fentanyl coming in because of open borders. We do not have open borders. That border package Casey voted for actually would have further restricted asylum, which is a whole other conversation about how at this point in time, I would argue both parties are taking hardline stances on the border. But I know we have a lot more races to get into, so I will get off my soapbox and save that one for another day.
Yeah, I mean, and speaking of other races, the next thing you're going to see on your ballot after U.S. Senator is the 3 state offices. We sometimes call them row offices: Attorney General, Auditor General, and Treasurer. If you are not familiar with those, last Friday's show, so October 25th, we linked up with our friends at CityCast Philly to talk all about those, what the office is responsible for.
Thank you again, CityCast Philly.
Yes, I know. So what those offices are responsible for, who's running, and what's at stake.
And I know these are not always the grabbiest races, but they're super important nonetheless. So check that episode out. If you are not caught up, you can find it on our website. That's pittsburgh.citycast.fm.
Today's show is brought to you by the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council. We know how much Yins love finding out about new events here on our podcast and in our Hey Pittsburgh newsletter. But if you're looking for even more options, we cannot say enough about the weekly arts and culture events roundups from our friends at the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council. Their arts blog has local arts and culture recommendations for every single day of the week, no exaggeration, including exhibits, concerts, performances, films, literary events, and so much more, all happening right here in our region. If you've ever gotten FOMO from missing out on a gorgeous local art opening or an installation that all your friends are posting about, I am pretty sure the Arts Council had the scoop. Be like us and check them out at pittsburghartscouncil.org or follow them on Instagram at PGH Arts Council.
Stop. 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 Had enough? Kick out mucus and quiet the cough with Mucinex 12-Hour DM for long-lasting cough and chest congestion relief. Buy Mucinex 12-Hour DM at your local retailer. Use as directed.
Next up, representative in Congress, aka the person representing you in the U.S. House of Representatives. So we're going to talk about the 2 that are most relevant to people in Allegheny County. First up, District 12. Democrat Summer Lee is running for re-election. She's known for her progressive policies and is part of this squad that includes other representatives like AOC and Rashida Tlaib. The challenger, Republican James Hayes, is a CFO for a sand and aggregate company.
We're going to start off with Lee because she is the incumbent. So Lee was elected to this office in 2022. Her campaign page touts that she's brought in more than $1 billion to Western PA for things like infrastructure and affordable housing, and with them, union jobs, which we know is a very important topic here in our part of the state.
Oh, totally. And Lee's other priorities include economic and environmental justice. So some examples, she's co-sponsored a bill that would bring the minimum wage up to $17 by 2028.
That's the federal minimum wage.
Yes. And then she introed and passed a bill to plug up and address abandoned gas wells,
which has come up a time or two here in Western Pennsylvania.
And Lee also supports maintaining access to reproductive care, so that includes abortion. She's campaigned for Harris this election cycle and has, done rallies focused on reproductive rights. And she's talked about the importance of Pennsylvania as a refuge state, for people coming from other states to seek abortion care.
Hayes, meanwhile, this is his first time in politics. He lives in Shadyside and he's worked in finance for more than 30 years. He told WPXI that while he was watching TV with his wife, he was complaining about some policies, and she basically told him to stop complaining, and now was the time to run for office. There is also a sad reason too here. One of Hayes' sons was killed in New Kensington. So according to Hayes' account and reporting at the time, his son was getting out of a car and some people came up and started firing their guns. It's an unsolved crime, but Hayes said that inspired him to make change.
So let's talk about some of that change that he wants to make.
So Hayes's issues, he is big on natural gas, wants to stop, quote unquote, illegal border crossings. He's pro-school choice. We've talked a lot about how school choice is shaken out in Pennsylvania, and he supports law enforcement. And his campaign website specifically says he'll, quote, will take on and defeat the squad members in D.C. who want to defund the police, end quote. And then in terms of abortion, that other big issue we keep talking about, he wants abortion rights to be a state decision, so he won't support any kind of national legislation on abortion, whether that's a ban or restore access.
And one issue that came up in the primary that's still being talked about here in the general is Israel and the war in Gaza. Lee has called for a ceasefire. She voted against sending unconditional military aid to Israel. In the primary, her challenger really focused in on Lee's stance against Israel, but Lee still won that primary by a landslide.
Yeah, and then Hayes is really pushing his support for Israel and has talked about how it's one of the U.S.'s closest allies. So, like you said, this is an issue that's continuing to play out in this race.
Next up on your ballot, again, depending on where you live, still in the U.S. House. This time it's the 17th district. So that's Beaver County and some Allegheny County suburbs.
I had not heard a ton about this race until pretty recently. I've seen way more local coverage of this in like the past week or so. I don't know, maybe it's because I live in Lee's district, but this was really interesting reading up on it all.
Yeah, I hadn't either. And I wonder if that's in part because of Lee's like higher profile friends. Like even at the DNC, she was sitting next to the Tennessee 3, AOC, so many other people that you just see on the news all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But, you know, the 17th district is no less important in this election. The AP identified this race as one of the 5 congressional races in our state that could determine who controls the U.S. House. So this is definitely one to keep an eye on.
So the candidates, incumbent Democrat Chris DeLuzio and Republican Rob Mercuri.
We'll start with the incumbent again, DeLuzio. He is wrapping up his first term in Congress. He's a Navy veteran, pro-union, and very big on rail safety. So he introduced a bill to improve rail safety as a response to the East Palestine train derailment. This has really been one of his big issues.
And then in terms of abortion rights, DeLuzio's in line with other Democrats. He's saying he's going to protect these rights, and he supported the Women's Health Protection Act, which would restore abortion rights.
Note that act was actually first proposed in 2013.
It's
so
been
like
around
way
for a
before
bit.
Roe fell. It has passed the House multiple times, but it failed in the Senate twice just in 2022. So it's still an uphill battle. And that's also part of why this conversation about who controls the Senate has been so key this election cycle.
Absolutely. So we've got DeLuzio, the incumbent, and then his challenger is Republican Rob Mercuri, who currently holds state office. He represents District 28 right now, so this would elevate him to Congress.
Yeah, so he's also a veteran. He was in the Army. There's a whole Army versus Navy thing here. Mercuri says that one of his top priorities is energy production. His campaign site says the state needs a quote unquote all of the above approach. I've heard that line echoed from folks across the political spectrum, especially as people cannot stop talking about Pennsylvania and fracking. Mercuri says he wants to bring in more jobs for the energy sector. And as a representative for our state, again, state level, he's co-sponsored a bill allowing self-driving cars to get tested on Pennsylvania roads, which passed.
Yeah, and Pittsburgh companies were actually pretty pivotal to that bill. So these candidates, both of them have talked a lot about how they're able to work across the aisle. They've also been really critical of each other's track records. Like Mercuri has been attacking DeLuzio for being, quote unquote, too liberal for the district. KDKA actually asked DeLuzio point blank if he's a Summer Lee progressive.
That's such a weird question.
I know. I also thought the same thing. Like, as a politician, even if you align with someone else's beliefs, you're gonna want to distinguish yourself. So what was DeLuzio's response?
I mean, his response was, what you might expect, Sophia, based on exactly what you just said. So he said, no, I am not. I am a Chris DeLuzio Democrat, Western Pennsylvania Democrat. DeLuzio has also been raising questions about who his opponent is spending time with. So he's been calling out Mercuri for campaigning with Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, who's denied the results of the 2020 elections. He's also come down hard on Mercuri's abortion record.
Yeah, Mercuri co-sponsored a bill in the state house that would have really restricted abortion rights and access here in Pennsylvania, but the bill never went anywhere. No one ever voted on it. Mercuri has said the same thing that a lot of other Republicans say right now, that he supports exceptions, but abortion rights should be left up to the states.
And that concludes our ballot explainer. So depending on where you're listening from, you might also have a state rep to vote for. Again, voting guides from Public Source, WESA, Spotlight PA, all very excellent. So go read up if you still need help with those.
And finally, we wanted to give you just a little primer about what to expect tomorrow on Election Day. So once again, polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you are in line at closing time, you do still get to vote. Full stop, no exceptions.
If you're in line, stay in line.
And, we get to pop into the polls, vote, and then just go about our days. But, county employees, election workers, and volunteers, they will be working extremely long days to make sure the election goes well. So props to them.
Yeah.
We actually got a tour of the warehouse in the north side where county workers are going to be counting all the mail-in ballots in person and where the election returns will actually get taken to for certification. Personally, I thought great place for a rave. But what's actually happening...
Oh, it did have that look, yeah.
People are going to start arriving to work at 5:30 in the morning, and they won't close the doors until every vote is counted.
Yeah, which is actually a little different than how it worked in the last presidential race. So they said back in 2020, when we had way more mail-in ballots, they paused and sent folks home around 2:30 in the morning to, get a little bit of rest and then start fresh a few hours later with their counting. But this time we got a grant that requires county workers keep going until we have a final preliminary count. So these people are going to be doing this for a long time if necessary.
Oof. Thank you to everyone doing that. And here in our county, we should have our preliminary results, not official, just preliminary, as soon as midnight. So that might not be true for the rest of Pennsylvania because every county does this a little differently, and Pittsburgh has nicer equipment than some places. These machines move really fast.
We actually got to see the equipment up close when we took the warehouse tour. It includes this machine that can open something like 50,000 ballots in an hour, and they did a little demo. I have never seen paper move that fast. I felt like I was in the Jetsons.
Yeah, and just to level set expectations too, like from everything we've read and the folks that we've talked to, I think it's fair to say we are going to know something by the wee hours on Wednesday. We will have a much clearer picture by Friday. The counties themselves, including Allegheny, officially have 15 business days to certify their results. So we do count them initially, then we count them officially, and then we count them again to certify that all of our totals are correct. Then after those 15 days, there's another 5-day period when people can legally challenge election results. And if this election is close, that's probably going to happen. Even if it's not, it could still happen.
But, the state has lots of experience doing this. It's done it many times before. Our Secretary of State, Al Schmidt, keeps reiterating that the whole process will go smoothly. Our elections are fair and secure. And then, once all of those counties have certified results, the state itself has to certify everything by December 11th.
Do y'all remember when no one paid any attention to certified results? Like the election came, you maybe watched results that night and you had an idea of who won before you went to bed. I don't remember even knowing that certified results happened.
Sure, but also I was alive for Bush v. Gore and the hanging Chad of it all. So.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Our entire adulthood has been marred by this, but still, there was a brief window that I vaguely remember when you just kind of knew.
This is the second election I've been a journalist for, and 2020, we all remember that. So, well, we'll be watching and sharing what we do know about the election results on Wednesday. So we will see you then.
That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. A heads up, if you are planning on being in the city this afternoon, both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are planning to hold events tonight in Pittsburgh. So Trump's going to be at PPG Paints Arena, and Kamala Harris, she changed it up. She's now expected at the Cary Blast Furnaces. So it sounds like if you want to avoid traffic, maybe don't be in the vicinity of either of those spaces. If you are liking the show, we do hope you'll tell someone. Word of mouth really helps folks find us. And of course, please do subscribe to our Hey Pittsburgh newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow with a special Swing City election edition of CityCast. So we will talk to you soon. Thank you, baby. Thank you for sharing Mama with us.
You've survived your first election coverage. Good job.
Almost.